Hey guys, it's Thomas with Chrono24 in New York City, and today we're doing another installment of our watch hunting series with special guest Troy Barmore. Troy is a watch writer in New York City, writing about watches, luxury goods, heritage menswear. He's been a vintage enthusiast for a long time and was the former head of sales for Analog Shift. Troy, thanks for coming on today, and if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about how you got into watches in the first place.
Sure. So watches were kind of brought to me through, from a lot of folks through my family. My brother owned a Girard-Perregaux chronograph that he got as a graduation present, but he was always too afraid to wear it. And I just coveted that watch, from the second I first saw it. So when I was 14, I took a summer job and saved up, I don't know, $700 or $800 in cash and bought it from him for cash and a guitar that I later got back.
Nice.
So I did pretty well on that. Yeah. But from then on, I was just enchanted with it. I was, 14 in school reading the history of Girard-Perregaux watches. I was a very weird kid, but it got into my veins and it hasn't really left since, so.
Well, there we go. Now, before we get started today, let me remind you that Chrono24 is giving away $10,000 towards a watch hunt of your own. If you want to find out how to enter and how to potentially win, check out the link in the description below. Now, $10,000 is also the amount of money we are working with today. Troy is going to choose 3 vintage watches, $10,000, 2 minutes each per round. We're going to do a dress watch, a sport watch, and a complication. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, typing in, clicking around, getting on Chrono24, let's do a little wrist check. Troy, what do you got for us today?
So today I wore my Seiko 6139-6000. This is actually a watch that I recently wrote about for Chrono24. This is one of the first automatic chronographs ever made. This particular reference is from the first year production, June, I believe, of 1969, from the Japanese domestic market.
Very good condition for 1969.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of my prized possessions. I think one of the coolest watches out there, and still a little bit of a deep well. You got to be kind of careful. We'll get into that a little bit later with these references, but one of the biggest kind of value propositions in vintage watches right now.
There we go. Yeah, and I love the Japanese day wheel as well. A nice little character, cool color, great complication from a great brand. Super, super cool watch.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I can't get enough of them.
There we go. Today I'm rocking the first vintage watch that I ever bought, which is the La Culture Powermatic. I think from the 1940s, and I believe it was the first mass-produced watch with a power reserve indicator. Gold filled, but we got brigade numerals, nicely patinated dial, blue steeled second hand, really nice character in the hands, really cool lugs.
Spectacular lugs on that thing.
Yeah, and for
so good.
This thing was under $2,000. Took a little bit to get it running, but a really good deal as far as a heritage manufacturer, cool watch brand, a lot of character. So yeah, not a bad place to start. And speaking of which, let's get down to the hunt. So we have $10,000, 3 rounds, sport, dress, complication, 2 minutes each. Feeling up for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people try to get into watch collecting in the first place, they can feel a little bit lost at sea because it's such an enormous category and field. There's so many different watches out there. There's an infinite number of references.
And always more to learn too.
Yeah, literally, when I was selling vintage watches at Analog Shift, I can honestly say that I learned something new every single day. It sounds a little trite to say it, but I learned a new reference, a new detail, some new intricate thing that I never noticed before. It's a funny thing when you buy vintage watches, a lot of people will experience this. You'll do all your research and you'll think you know everything about it, and then you go and buy it, and you'll own it, and it'll be awesome, and then you'll learn a new detail about that reference, and your heart will stop, and you'll have to run to your watch box and look and go, oh, does my watch have that little thing? And then you'll see it, oh, it's got the thing. All right, I'm good, I did all right. So when I go about advising people or in my own collecting, I like to just kind of tell everybody, all right, take a deep breath, it's okay. There's a lot to learn, but you kind of take your time and you seek out the watches that really speak to you and try to kind of figure out a little bit of a strategy for what your collection is gonna be, whether that is going deep on a particular reference or whether that is building a wardrobe of sorts, which is kind of how I go about it. I focus on specific references that have a story that means something to me, and then how that particular reference fits into the overall collection, how I'm gonna wear it. So I'm probably not gonna have multiple dive watches in my collection, because when am I gonna wanna wear a dive watch that I'm not gonna just wear my Submariner?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so nothing's competing with anything else. You have a roadmap ahead of time before you start putting money down.
Exactly, exactly. So, so the idea with today is, all right, so if you have $10,000, which is certainly an aspirational number to most of us, but it's something that with dedication and time and focus, you can work your way up to that. How do you build a collection that kind of gives you a nice wardrobe to start on? And I think in order to do that, having something that is a little bit more dressy, something that is more sporty, and then something that's horologically interesting, a complication of some sort. And if you know where to look and kind of know how to go off some of the beaten paths, you can find a ton of really fascinating watches, really cool watches with all sorts of interesting history and a huge amount of value. And hopefully we'll try to actually even stay under that budget.
Yeah.
No promises. We'll do our best.
All right, without further ado, let's get some action going. Bring in the Bitstream TV. We'll put 2 minutes on the clock. You got your War Room battle station set up here, and let's get to hunting.
All right, let's do it.
First hunt, we got $10,000 to start. I'm gonna get some time on the shock, pun intended. No bezel click here, but we do have a little G-Shock ASMR. Stopwatch is ready. Whenever you're ready, sir.
All right, so let's get going. So dress watches, typically what you're gonna have is gonna be, very simple, elegant, time-only watches. Given larger budgets, I'd be looking at precious metals, but for this, we're probably gonna stick to steel or maybe gold cap, depending. One of the pieces that I like to look at is the Universal Genève pole router.
Yes, sir.
It's a go-to for a lot of folks because it is a really beautiful piece. It's an interesting piece. The early twisted lug cases designed by Gerald Genta. So there's some really interesting, horological history there. Yep. The thing with pole routers that you have to remember is a lot of them got Frankenwatched. So you got to be really, really careful on which dial variation is with which case, which with reference.
Yep, and there are thousands of variations, I believe.
Such a deep wheel. Deep well, that is. So, something like this here, the pole router date, for 4,000 of these beautiful sword hands, this is gonna be an awesome piece. I actually like looking at a dial like this with a little bit of, something or other going on. Shows that it hasn't been redialed. That's something that you're gonna look at. Yep. All right, how much time do I have left?
A minute left, we're halfway done.
Oh boy, all right. Let's see here. Date justs are awesome, and I like earlier ones with alpha hands. Okay, they're a little bit off the beaten path. 4,000, 5,000, that's a little too much. So we're gonna
keep it with the pole router, or you wanna go somewhere else? We got 40 seconds.
We're gonna go Omega Suveran. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about these later. Very, very cool watches.
Yep, good prices too.
Right here, $2,400.
30 seconds left, get in it.
Radium dial, $2,400. Hasn't been reloomed to look at it. We're going with that one.
All right, saved with time to spare.
How about that? Woo!
All right, so let's...
That 2 minutes fast is a lot faster than you think it does.
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Holy cow, all right.
All right, so we have our dress watch down with the Omega Suveran.
Yes, absolutely.
We have 7,500 to work with. Next up, we are going to do sport watch.
Yes. All right, so sport watches, obviously you want it to have a little bit of, grit to it. Yep, get started. Rolex is obviously what everybody thinks of, but I'm sorry, you're not getting a Suveran or anything of the like in our budget today, not anymore. So I like to look at vintage Seiko, naturally, as you can see. The 6105 is one of the coolest, most important historical dive watches out there. These were worn in Vietnam by a lot of American soldiers, very famously featured in Apocalypse Now, thus the nickname Captain Willard. Now these, you also have to be a little bit careful in terms of like replacement components and whatnot. How am I doing on time?
Minute and a half.
Minute and a half, I got a little bit of time. I'm definitely going with a 6105. There's so many sub variants of these, thinner cases, thicker cases, and the like. I like a 6105 that has a little bit of just grit on it. I don't like them super clean. I want them to look like they've been beat up.
Yeah, like they've been through a battle or two.
A little bit, so let's see this guy.
Great patina on this one.
Yeah.
And some little wear and tear.
Little wear and
wear
tear.
Your watches, even vintage watches, just wear them.
Yep. You earn the scratches.
Minute left?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not even gonna overthink this. Let me
love at first sight.
Here. I'm gonna look, I just wanna check the crown. These are the things, you get a lot of replacement crowns. Sometimes you get replacement handsets. Given more time, I'd be looking into this handset. But where the heck is the crown? Come on, give me a crown shot. It's got the lock, I'm good. Yep, this is the one, 2,700 bucks. It's a little expensive for these. You know, this is definitely upper market. These are not, you know, $1,000 what they used to be, but get the good one, honestly, get the best reference that you can, the best condition that you can for your budget. And then honestly, with pieces like this, by the time you're done worrying about whether or not you spent too much, the market's gonna move up past whatever you paid. That's kind of how it works.
Great point. And with that, we have 5 seconds left, plenty of time. Let's do a double check on our budget, shall we? So we did
725. Oh, we're at $5,000, man. I got it.
Five for a complication. Let's get complicated, huh?
Let's get complicated. Alrighty, let me clear this out. Have we started yet? I'm already.
We have not started yet.
Okay.
Take a deep breath.
Whew. All right, so lay some ground here, right? So complications. Now, you know, you can look at a lot of different complications here. You know, moon phases, tourbillons, all these sorts of things, annual calendars, perpetual calendars, these are all very, very expensive complications, right? However, one complication that a lot of people don't, I think, really realize is as complicated as it really is chronographs, especially integrated chronographs, not modular chronographs.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so chronographs, you know, stopwatches, obviously, right? You get your little chronograph, seconds hand counting away. There are different ways of building chronograph movements. You have lateral clutch chronographs, you have column wheel chronographs. Gets a little bit in the weeds, but the way that most companies make them now is they take a movement that is telling the time, usually an automatic movement, and then they put a chronograph module on top of it. Okay, it's the stopwatch that's integrated in, or you know, put on top. But building all of that together into a movement from the ground up is really, really difficult and really, really expensive. It's why a lot of companies, even still to this day, don't have their own in-house integrated chronograph movement. So I like to think of chronographs as one of the actually most interesting complications out there. Even more so if you can get it involving a date complication of some sort, and that's where we're gonna start off. So I'm not even gonna necessarily look at specific watch references. I'm gonna start by looking at movements. Let's go.
Let's do it.
One of the most famous movements in the world, thanks to the Paul Newman Daytona, right, is the Valjoux 72. But what I'm gonna be looking at here is the Valjoux 72C.
Ooh.
These were used in all sorts of different watches. These are chronographs with date complications on them. Now, I'm gonna get a lot of Valjoux 72s here, looking through here, but I'm looking for, yeah, something like Ulysse Nardin. I mean,
and we got just about 5,000 to work with.
Yep. So I'm gonna get a little bit, I'm gonna go down a little bit further. I want something a little more off the beaten path. Here we go. Ooh, now we're talking.
Little Wakmann, huh?
Yeah, Wakmann triple date chronograph. These are super cool, but I want one a little bit more obscure than that. Also, you can get some, man, remember when any cars were $1,000? Bloody hell. All right, where am I going here? How much time do I have?
Just over a minute.
Just over a minute. Okay, I'm good on time. Saw one I like.
You waiting to be surprised? Are you looking for anything in particular?
I'm just making sure that I cover my bases here. I'm not gonna go to page 2 as much as I want to.
You can sort from low to high as well if you want.
No, here's where I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go significantly under budget. Look
All
at
right,
this guy.
45 seconds left. Tell us about this one. Oh, let's take a look.
Yes, this is gorgeous. All right, so Valjoux 72C, Wakmann, triple date, right? Yeah, triple date chronograph here.
And that date function is cool.
Pointer date, you have day and month. This is a wildly complicated watch, very horologically interesting, for $4,800.
20 seconds.
We're done, that's it.
There we go. Let's take a closer look while we got the time.
Yeah, we got plenty of time, but
a little pop of color here, as you might see.
Yep, and again, I saw that earlier one with the white hand. They used a lot of different handsets on these. This idea in vintage watches that, you know, oh, well, they only use this hand for this reference. That's not how it was back then. You're out of the red hand, go into the drawer, get the white hands out. Like, just sell product, like, we don't care. They were not as particular as we are today about which hand went with which reference. So you have some variation here. But that red pointer date there, the red chrono hand, gorgeous dial, a little bit of cream patina on it. I mean, come on, you can't do better than that. Look at the little Lume plots around the indices. Yep. It's just stunning. I mean,
little custard Lume there.
Dude.
Great condition, very well preserved, super sharp numbers.
Stunning
Wonderful
piece.
design.
Yep, and again, horologically, wildly complicated. This watch would be unbelievably difficult and unbelievably expensive to make today.
This is a lot of information in 39 millimeters.
Yup. Doesn't get better than that.
Value 72.
Mid-century chronographs, man, it's just as cool as it gets.
Well, we were trying to make this a challenge for you, but you did very well with 2 minutes each, 10K total. Let's take a little tour. Just do go to the notepad and get our top 3 there.
Let's see here.
Just so we can get
notepad. Yes.
All right, so here we go. So 3 watches, 10K. A lot of good variety. And there's even
that's a collection right there, man.
Yeah.
Got a lot of bases. Myself.
A lot of bases covered. Yeah. And stylistically, they're pretty cohesive as well, as far as kind of
yeah, you can definitely see
like a tuxedo dial-ish.
Yeah, you can see my taste coming through here. So start with we're going to dive into a little recap, right? Now that the clock isn't running, the Omega Suveran, these were really, really cool watches. There's a few different dial variations on them. They were made for the Swedish government, actually. Suveran meaning sovereign. And they were sold essentially in the same kind of ideas like a war bond. After, in the middle of and after World War II, the economy in Sweden wasn't exactly cranking. So these watches were sold through the government to generate some revenue for the government. So you really could only get these in Sweden at the time. So it's a pretty unique, pretty distinct and special kind of variation on the Omega, dressy watch. Tuxedo dials, I think, are extremely elegant, very dressy.
Yes, never go out of style.
Never go out of style. And again, you get a little touch of radium, you get, a little bit of that radiation there. This thing would Geiger for sure.
Yeah.
Don't lick it. And you'll be all right.
There's a lot of kind of sub-dial or small seconds Omega movements that will essentially run forever.
Yeah.
If you just get them serviced regularly, very well built. Yeah, and tell us about, okay, so that's dress. Let's go up the list.
So that's actually a great point to note on that, and this will pertain to the other ones as well. The watch, a watchmaker doesn't care what's on the dial, right? So a 3-hand movement's a 3-hand movement's a 3-hand movement as far as they're concerned in terms of servicing. Same as well with, with a chronograph or otherwise. So when you're buying these watches, you do have to take a little bit of consideration into what's it gonna cost to, to service it, right? Yep. And that's definitely something that you have to keep in mind with mechanical watches.
Yeah, this was $975 and then like $350 to service.
And which is, that's a very good price to
yeah, and you factor it in, so you get a $1,500 watch. And that's your total cost when you're looking at something.
When folks are looking at Speedmasters a lot of the time, if they're looking at a 321 movement versus later movement, an 861, et cetera, that 321 movement's gonna be a lot more expensive to service than any of the subsequent ones because it's a much higher tension, much more complicated movement. So you really gotta take that into consideration. Moving on. So the 6105, man, I don't even know where to start with these. Vintage Seikos are so cool and so—
As we've seen.
Yes, naturally I'm partial to them. There's so much history, still to this day, they're making some of the greatest watches on the planet. The cool thing about the 6105s is they actually, they were put through the ringer. They went to war. They were used for, in the military, they were used for professional diving. I mean, this is the genuine article. This isn't a watch that's trying to pretend to be a dive watch. This is a true dive watch in every sense of the word. Now, with vintage Seikos, you have to be a little careful. You can get some really great value, but there's a lot of aftermarket components that get put into these watches, especially the 6139s. These are the worst when it comes to this. They're an absolute minefield. So take your time, take longer than 2 minutes, and do your research. Look at a lot of references. Look up, previously sold pieces on legitimate websites that legitimate dealers that you trust. Look at the watches they used to sell and kind of use those as references. Hey, does this have the right handset? Does this have the right dial variation? For a very long time, Seiko didn't produce, and actually on these pieces still didn't produce service components for these watches. So Cottage Industries arose to create, service dials, service hands for them, which, as noble as that intention might be, it's not an authentic dial. So a lot of people will spend $500 on a 6139 or spend $1,000 on a 6105 and then come to find they've got to put another $1,000 into it to make it correct. Notice I don't say original, I say correct. Originality in vintage watches, hot take, is a myth, okay? If anybody, follow me on this.
Okay.
If anybody tells you that a vintage watch, I'm gonna look straight in the camera for this, is completely original, they either don't know or they don't know. Because you can't prove to me that this dial was the watch that was the dial that the watch was born with. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you that for sure. I know that it is exactly what's supposed to be. It's the correct one. It's an authentic one. So that's really all you need to be concerned with. Is it right? Is it what's supposed to be there? Once you do that and kind of get that into your head, you can take a little bit more of a deep breath and feel a little bit more at ease diving into the vintage watch world. You know, because again, I've had people sell me watches where they were the original owner, one owner watches, and they said, I've never serviced this watch, ever. I've never had it touched. And then I open the case back up and I see service engravings in the back, markings from 1989 and 1995. Oh yeah, I guess I did. No one knows, no one remembers these things. So take that into consideration, take a little bit of a deep breath, and then you won't have to be you know, quite so stressed out about it.
So it's not an insurmountable challenge, it's just, you just got to read up a little bit about and kind of do a visual comparison of, you know, one reputable example to the one that you're considering.
Exactly. You know, take your time. The market moves fast, but it doesn't move that fast.
And there's a lot of vintage Seikos, for example, everywhere all the time.
All the time. They are definitely, again, they're like Rolexes. They're not rare watches necessarily, but they're special and they're cool.
Yeah, and they last a while, which is why we've seen so many today. So great example with the 6105. Let's move on to the Wakmann.
Yep. So, you know, Wakmann was like a lot of watch companies that didn't survive the quartz crisis. You know, there's so many different references that were made from different manufacturers, different movement manufacturers. I mean, there's more history in this watch brand than I even know. And again, this is where we get into it. I don't consider myself a vintage watch expert by any stretch of the imagination, because that word expert, right, it translates to some degree of like totality of knowledge, right?
Yeah, an unquestionable encyclopedia.
Yeah, and you know, there are certainly experts that I know in specific brands and specific references, but I honestly can't think of a single person that I know who is a vintage watch expert and knows everything that there is to know about vintage watches.
Everything, yeah.
If somebody tells you they know everything there is to know about vintage watches, then they're trying to sell you something, obviously.
Yeah.
So, you know, so definitely a cool brand to do some research in. Again, the Valjoux 72, one of the absolute workhorse movements and one of the most famous movements in history. You know, it's a beautiful piece, it's a complicated piece. It was used in dozens of different references by dozens of different manufacturers. You don't need to buy a Paul Newman Daytona to get a Valjoux 72, you know.
Very complicated, and this is a great example of a watch that on name brand alone may not carry a lot of weight in today's world versus like, you're not gonna walk in and like, oh, it's a Rolex, and people just know and respect that. Yeah. But you are gonna get a lot of enthusiast credibility from something like this.
And this is, I mean, my whole philosophy on collecting anything, whether it's collecting watches or collecting, you know, eyewear, collecting guitars, whatever. I love something where you see it from across the room and you go, wow, that is really, really cool. I have no idea what it is.
Yes.
I have no idea who made that. I have no idea where that came from. What is that? Like, that is so much more interesting to me than seeing something that really all you need is, you know, a big fat bank account and, you know, enough pull with an AD to get. That's just not that interesting to me, you know? Something like this, and also from a horological standpoint, you know, it's incredibly complicated. It's very difficult to build, but, you know, polishing is something that gets talked a lot about in vintage watches. Now, polishing is not in and of itself a bad thing.
Right, it is a deal breaker for some people, but I would say unnecessarily so.
It really, yeah, it shouldn't be a deal breaker. And a lot of people don't understand what polishing really means. They say, oh, I want my watches unpolished. And I usually go, oh, so you like scratches and dings and dents and you want it really roughed up. And they go, wait, what? No. They think unpolished means new old stock. Yes. Does not.
Yeah, which is very hard to get for something, for example, from 1975.
It's not gonna happen, you know, most of the time. And if it is, you're gonna...
Or a military watch. Why would you want to polish military watch?
Yeah, why would you? Yeah, so again, polishing should not be a deal breaker. Over polishing, poorly polished, that should be. So if you're looking at a watch and you see all of the lugs are the same thickness, or you see one lug is significantly thinner or thicker than the others, that kind of asymmetry, that should be a red flag to you.
So less black and white on polishing, more of a shades of gray kind of approach?
Exactly. You know, and same thing with lume condition. You know, like this Suveran here, there's a little bit of lume loss down here at 7. You know, see that right away.
Which is natural for a radioactive material.
Absolutely, it's going to happen with radium. One day it's going to happen with all of our tritium watches. I hate to tell you, there will come a day, someday, probably after we're all dead, but who knows, where tritium is going to start falling off of watches in the same way that radium did. That's okay, you know, and even if you know, you've had a handset on a watch been relumed with some vintage radium or tritium, that happens. Yep. As long as it's disclosed by the dealer that this stuff has happened and it's priced accordingly, I don't personally have an issue with it, you know. Once you get into reluming a dial, that's a bridge too far for me. Set your own parameters in terms of what's important for you in terms of your condition and stick to them, and then get the best one you can afford. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the cleanest thing available. Same thing, 6105. I don't want a new old stock 6105, right? I kind of want it to look like it went through a wood chipper, right? If it's got a, I mean, a buddy of mine has one that has this big gouge out of the bezel, literally chunk of metal missing. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, it's part of the story, and for new old stock, I'll put that in quotes, you're gonna pay a lot of money for something that even resembles that.
And then you're also gonna worry about it.
Yeah.
You might not want to actually wear that often. You clip it on a door jamb, your heart's gonna stop.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's not a companion piece, it's a museum piece at that point.
Exactly, and there's a time and a place for that, but you know, set your own personal parameters in terms of what condition is important to you, and stick to your guns. You know, if you see a watch that you like but doesn't have the condition that you want, whatever that means, but it's just not quite right for you, but you can afford it, just wait. Save up a little bit more, take your time, get the one that really works for you and really speaks to you, and you will never regret it.
Yeah, yeah. And we've covered a lot of bases here. I'm very happy with what you've chosen. We've got an old Swiss manufacturer with Omega. We've got Seiko, which is kind of the starting point for a lot of people as far as vintage. And then something more underground, but very complicated. And the Wakmann is a great example of something that you may not know a whole lot about it when you get into it, but the more you find out about it, it's kind of like a project that never ends.
Yeah, you're opening a new book for yourself on a watch. You can even, you can do the research beforehand, or you can buy it and then you can go down that rabbit hole and learn all about it. I always like to say, if you put a watch on and it makes you giggle, it's got to pass the giggle test. You know, and if it doesn't, then what are we doing? This stuff is too expensive to not feel passionate about it, right? To not feel excited about it. But at the same time, there is a watch for every budget out there. I can honestly say that. If you have $100, I can tell you about a really cool watch, vintage or otherwise, that you could probably find. If you have $100,000, you can also find a heck of a watch, right? The money is secondary if you are following it from a place of genuine passion and interest. And then you'll never go wrong.
Yeah, and even in the vintage watch market, there's always things that are overlooked and underpriced, and it's, I think it's a matter of collecting knowledge as well as collecting physical items themselves.
Absolutely, might not be a Rolex or a Patek, but that's okay.
Yeah, but then you just bring something new to the table, you get your own interest, you learn something in the process, and you get something that no one has ever seen before.
Absolutely.
There we go. Well, I think we covered a lot of really good bases today. This is an illustration. We've had a lot of coffee as well. This is an illustration of...
Not over-caffeinated at all.
A good roadmap, $10,000, which is not a small amount of money, but also not a huge amount of money. 3 really good, really reputable vintage watches. Troy, thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for doing this.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, a hell of a lot of fun. We have more videos coming all the time. In the meantime, enjoy your watches. We'll see you soon.